It's a beautiful
Is he?
building. And it's there. I think.
Okay.
Chair Ryan, we are live.
I'd like to call the meeting to order and ask the secretary to take the roll, please.
Thank you, Chair Ryan.
Present.
Regent Balducci. Regent Bloom.
Present.
Thank you. Regent Gray Kemp. Absence is noted. Regent Howery.
Present.
Regent James. Absence is noted. Regent Jappanen. I see her on screen. I'll come back to her as she gets her audio on. Regent McCarthy.
Present.
Regent Porth.
Present.
Regent Santiago. Absence noted. Regent Stewart. Regent Jappanen. Yeah. I am going to record her present. Regent Stewart. Absence is noted. And Regent Wright. Absence is noted. Chair Ryan, you have a quorum. And would we like to record a quorum for the FAC?
Lois? I don't have the list in front of me.
Yeah,
But
there is a quorum.
okay, thank you. We're all set. Thanks.
Ryan, you have
Before we get started, I'd like to thank a few people who helped put together today's agenda. The Vice President of Administration and Finance, Ben Barnes, the Chair and the Vice Chair of the Faculty Advisory Committee, Dr. Kalina Sasanker, and Dr. David Blitz. As our agenda indicates, I've asked President Chang and the FAC Chair Sasanker to provide some welcoming remarks, followed by Ben Barnes' presentation of the fiscal year 5 state appropriations. Dr. Sasanker will lead that. President Chang?
Thank you, Chair Ryan. Hope the summer is not quite official yet, but I hope it's getting closer and it's off to a good start for everyone. I'm happy that we're all here, and I'm glad that we're going to be having a discussion that I think will be beneficial and fruitful, not just for understanding some of the details of what is a very kind of complicated process on the heels of a rigorous, at times bruising legislative session. But we're here now, and I think it's important to make sure that we communicate clearly, transparently, and try to come to a genuine shared understanding of the facts, where we are, and how we hope to move forward collectively. I also just want to say quickly that I'm happy that we can get together with the board, members of our administration and the FAC. And I just want to be very honest for a moment. You know, when I first came onto this position 2 years ago, I would say that the positioning of the FAC and the administration felt quite adversarial. And I don't feel it's that way now. I feel like we've come a pretty long way in terms of just being able to talk to each other, work with each other, and try to figure things out together. It's not perfect, may never be perfect, but I think all we can really ask for and hope for is that the will to do right by our institutions and by our system is always there, and that we put our best efforts forward. And I feel like that's been happening definitely this past year. And I just want to say I appreciate all the members of the FAC, specifically because I don't get to speak to you all that often. But I know that you do this because you want good things for our students, you want good things for your colleagues, you want good things for the institutions that you call home, and we want those things too. So I'll stop there and just say thanks again.
Now we'd like to call on the RFAC Chair, Kalina Sasanker, for some remarks.
Thank you. So first I want to say I'm really glad to be here also. I'm glad to be in this space with you all. I think I've been serving on this board since 2020, but because of COVID, we've not really gotten to do this. I'm also really glad that these meetings have been established, and I know that that was facilitated by President Chang. It is much better than what we had before, certainly, though an hour every 6 months is maybe not quite enough. So I thank you for all being here. I look forward to the conversation. I I have quite a few things that I wanted to say in order to sort of facilitate a shared understanding, perhaps, or at least share my understanding to see if we can get somewhere um, of what happened maybe this session and its historical context. I think that I'm going to reserve that till the end, um, but I do hope to address that perhaps before we talk about collaboration, which is a bit of a mix up to the agenda. But if you'll indulge me, I'd like to do that. So yeah, thank you all. Okay.
what I was doing. I've provided some hard copies for those of us who are here in the room. I am aware that I've grown accustomed to sharing these things online. And sometimes they're harder to see when you're in a room looking over some distance. So I want to make sure everybody can see clearly what I'm providing to you. So just to summarize, we've obviously we've all been the board, faculty advisory committee, individual members of the faculty and staff of all of our institutions have been actively involved in the legislative process this year. I certainly appreciate all of the contributions and effort on leading to deep from all members of our community during this process. This table summarizes where we are for fiscal 24 and 25. Sorry, I'll shout even more. Fiscal, where we are for fiscal 24 and 25. It includes the governor's proposed total funding for those 2 years. The Appropriations Committee, which, as you can see, was materially better in both years. And then the final budget, which was, again, materially better in 24, and actually slightly smaller in 25 because they moved some funds from 25 back into 24 for the Guided Pathways program. As you can see, I think the most at this larger level, the takeaway that is of most consequence for CSCU is that there is a $116 million drop off in state assistance between fiscal 24 and fiscal 25. That amounts to almost 10% of the annual spending of all CSU institutions combined. So here, this kind of makes that point again, that the set of bars on the left, which is fiscal 24, we saw steady improvement through the legislative process, got to a number that I think is in line with our needs, generally speaking, but the drop off in the second year continues to be a source of extraordinary concern for me and for all of us at CSCU. And we're trying to sort through that now as we speak. So this is a little bit more of a difficult table, but that's why I provided you with a handout. This is all of the detail. I think it's helpful for everyone to have it for their information. This is all of the detailed amounts that were provided in all the different categories in the appropriation package. There are a couple of things that I would call attention to. There was some funding for the PACT program. You can see that that's in this bottom, the first row in the bottom section of the table. You can see that we've gotten $23.5 million in 24 and $28.5 million in 25. That's compared to 15 million that we got in 23, although we had some carried forward expenditures that we were able to use this year as well. The current cost of the program is about $20 million. So we believe we'll have enough to pay for the PAC program. However, in 24 and 25, they have removed the community colleges from the Roberta Willis program, which provided historically about $8.5 million of financial aid to community college students. So it's not necessarily net new money, although the PAC program tends to be very effective and well understood by our students, and it is easier for us to administer it as a single financial aid program than having multiples with different criteria. There are problems with the Roberta Willis administration on a statewide basis that we're all familiar with. So it's good news, but I would temper the excitement about getting more money by the fact that was money that we previously had received for a different kind of financial aid. The other point that I would make about this is the extent to which the funding that we received is in what do they call the category? Provide operation support through short-term recovery funds. Those are apparently non-recurring, although they have recurred for 4 years now. The governor in his budget proposal and the legislature through its adoption of legislature, it's not quite clear. They didn't say anything about the out years, but the governor's in his proposal indicated that this was a step down plan. So you can see in the governor's proposal, he recommended 97.7 million in 24 and then 48.8 the following year. And it was assumed and stated in the governor's budget proposal that that would be zero in the year after that. The numbers are higher, thankfully, at least in the first year under the final adopted budget. And there is also some temporary operating support provided through carry forward funds that were leftover money from fiscal 23. But the reliance, in 24, it's over $200 million. And in 25, it's about $75 million. Having such large amounts of our financial aid package, of our aid package from the state come in the form of non-permanent funds is an extreme disadvantage for the system. It's very hard for us to make plans. It's very hard for us to build momentum around activities when we're constantly having to address budget shortfalls. I'm sure we're all familiar with that pattern. I think that we certainly, one of the things that we were very interested in our requests throughout this legislative process was to seek to have funding be provided through the block grant so that it was built in and there would be an expectation that those funds would be available in the future years and that those funds would grow commensurate with the expenses of operating state government or operating our portion of state government, reflect collective bargaining agreements, et cetera. But because all those funds are offered as temporary assistance, I feel as though we should, we have to work with the appropriation that we have, which suggests that we are going to see curtailment of funds in 25 and quite possibly additional curtailment of those remaining one-time funds in fiscal 26. There are also some other FOIA comes first. So in addition to the sort of we have some debt budget problems. We anticipate there are several of our institutions are likely to be facing deficits next year in fiscal '24. We believe that with the depth of the reductions for '25, we can anticipate that all of our institutions would have significant budget deficits in fiscal '25. That creates a significant challenge for the institutions and CSCU to confront over the next year or two. However, I think it's very helpful to put this in the context of the overall enrollment environment that faces higher education, particularly public higher education, the regional publics, universities, and community colleges. So the next two slides are from Nathan Graw's book called The Agile College. He's a demographer and scholar of public higher education, or of higher education generally. But his results are only one of a number of demographic analyses one could point to that shows similar trends. But this one we have here, and I think his analysis that goes with it is worth reading, and it's extraordinarily well supported. As you can see here, the line is in 2026 because that's when Dr. Graw identified this slope beginning. But you can see that between 24 and 26, the Northeast region is already beginning to, actually the Northeast region, the purple line, begins its decline in 25 and declines to about nearly 15% of its enrollment, at least as a region, as a sector of the industry, is projected to lose 15% of its enrollment between 2025 and 2030. And then if the corollary chart for the community colleges shows a very similar pattern, certainly in the Northeast, with reductions beginning in 2025 and continuing through the end of the decade. In the case of the community colleges, the community college sector, well, we're actually below the 100 there, so it's ends up being about 10 or 12% reduction over that 5-year period coming up. I believe these projections were clearly developed prior to knowledge of the impact of the pandemic on community college and regional public enrollment. So I believe that it's quite possible that the years between now and 2025 we will see some recovery because there was a bounce down during the pandemic. But there may be reasons, I believe statistically, that we may revert to mean somewhat over the next year or two. We've seen some positive signs in enrollment over the last year. However, we don't believe that those are going to last. We see the demographic changes and believe that there is very little that we can do to completely avoid their impact. I mean, I hope we will be outperform the environment, and we will do everything in our power to maintain enrollment. And we certainly, as I said, we should be fighting for enrollment steadily through this process. However, there is a significant headwind over the next 5 years that, in my view, in conjunction with the 1, 2, and 3-year budget challenges we face, are extremely concerning for the board and for the system. And I believe that we will be submitting spending plan to the Finance Committee soon that reflects these challenges and begins the process of identifying the solutions to them. So I'm happy to take any questions and discussion on that presentation.
The items we really take a beating on recovery dollars from 147 to 48 billion in 25. I mean, that's the biggest single one that stands out. Am I correct?
Yes.
I mean, you have 2 others. I see the others up there. These students.
No, that's correct. The other area that I would identify, and it is because of its impact, it doesn't show up here. The state also changed the way that they manage fringe benefits, so that in the past there were certain employees who were on the general fund and certain employees who were on the operating fund, and those on the general fund had their entire fringe benefit covered by the state, and those on the operating fund, we paid for them, although in a number of cases there were supplemental grants to cover the operating fund fringe benefits. Um, That has been changed so that now we as a system will pay for the health benefits and everything except pensions. We will pay all of those costs for all of our employees, and the state will cover the pension-related fringe benefit costs for all of our employees. This has a positive impact of lowering our fringe benefit rate down to below 40. It's been up above 70 for a while for many of our employees. So it will lower the fringe benefit rate and lower the amount that we expend on fringe benefits in general, but it will also remove a significant subsidy that the state was providing to us for fringe benefits. There was a make-whole payment that that the governor proposed that is in the final budget of about $41 million that the governor's budget uh, identified as the amount extra we would have to pay under the new arrangement. Uh, We believe that was not entirely correctly calculated. We believe that the overall impact of the loss of the change in fringe benefits is about $10 million because of basically because they calculated the make-whole payments on fiscal 22 information, and everything's gotten more expensive. So there's about a $10 million just general loss to inflation. In addition, at the same time that they made this change, they eliminated all the operating fund fringe support, which the institutions had been receiving. I would point out that in 23, for instance, there was if you look on the table there, $64.5 million in additional fringe benefits support that had been provided by the legislature. And it was 60 million the year before that. So the state has been providing us extra funding for fringe benefits. A great deal of that went to the community colleges. And so the loss of those sources of funds at the same time that the state reorganized how they administer fringe benefits has had a particularly harsh effect on the resources available to CT State. But overall, it has been the change in overall levels of aid reflects a significant drop in state support for fringe benefits.
I believe Mike Shea has a hand up. Mike Shea has a hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, is that okay if I speak? Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay, thanks. Ben, first of all, thank you for, I mean, you're always really straightforward, always have been, really appreciate your work overall and certainly here. I just want to ask, I have sort of three observations slash questions. One is that drop in demographics you talked about at the end. The problem that we face there is not just the drop in demographics, but it's thinking that we're already funded well enough that the drop in other words, when we're dropping in demographics, that sort of should mean if we stayed funded the same way, we would be able to help the students better that already aren't getting enough help. We're already underfunded. So I would hope someone would think about that and the governor and the legislature might think of the drop in demographics not as a loss of revenue from the community colleges, but as an opportunity to keep the same funding and help those students better. Because right now we're terribly underfunded. We're getting weaker students because of COVID and high school and just in general, they just need more attention. And we're kind of cheating them if we're not giving them more attention. So I'd just like to think of that drop in demographics a different way than a drop in revenue. Second, and I'm interested in your comment on all three of these things. The second thing I want to say is that the raise by the governor, that unfunded raise, it seems like the governor is asking, is sort of giving the raise to the university, to the state employees, but not funding it. And, that's just got to be a problem. I mean, yes, thank you for the raise, but why make the universities pay for it and cut in a sense, cut their subsidies and revenue? And then the third thing is, it seems like there's been part of the problem we have here is a big disconnect between the system office and the governor and the legislature. I mean, I think I really appreciate you and President Chang proposing you know, the plan for the system and the funding. I thought it was a great plan, and a good ask, and an ask we've never had before. So, you know, kudos to you all for that. But somehow the legislature and the governor just wasn't ready to hear it, or weren't ready to hear it. Um, and I'm wondering if there's something that can be done to mend or approach that differently in the future, so that that ask isn't sort of doesn't fall on, if not deaf ears, at least resistant ears. And it just seems like maybe there needs to be some better communication between the system office and the governor's office and the legislature. So I was just wondering if you had any comments on any of those three things.
So Mike, I'll speak to a few things. I appreciate your comments and of course your engagement as always. I've come to have a few conversations with you informally through the past year, especially, and so thanks as always for being kind of upfront with your thoughts and wanting to help. So I'll say this. I mean, you know, when we went into this legislative session, we absolutely agree with you that we feel that the system had not received an adequate level of funding for a considerable period of time, right? And so that was clearly something that we discussed intensively with our legislators and throughout the process. And so, you know, we didn't gain the traction we wanted this year. That's clear. It doesn't mean that we won't continue to advocate for what we think is an appropriate and sustainable level of funding for the system, because that's what the institutions and the faculty and the students and staff all deserve. But, you know, I think this is where, you know, big things don't happen in one session or two sessions. I think those who have been in state government and engaged with state government far longer than I have will tell you that. Sometimes it takes time for some good ideas to germinate. And I would just say that based on our collective efforts, and I want to give a real, you know, shout out to our collective bargaining units, the AUP, 4C, SWOF, all of you who are at the Capitol over and over again, advocating for not just your constituent units, but for the whole system. You know, we have had more response from legislators saying, you know, we want to keep talking to you about this, right? Maybe some of them just didn't get enough information at the right time. Maybe we can continue to sharpen the great story we have to tell about our system and our institutions. But um, I just want to make it clear that, you know, our work is clearly not over. So maybe we did not yield the exact result that we wanted this time around. That's fine, right? It's where we landed. But I would also point to this. Um, when we look at this final budget that has been signed and will move forward, it is $164 million greater than the original governor's proposed budget. And that's saying something, you know? So I think I don't want us to feel destitute like we failed. You know, this is hard work. It's a challenge. At times it feels like a struggle for sure, but um, you know, we did land in a better place than where we originally started with the governor's proposed budget. And we will continue to try to make strides and move forward and communicate with all of our partners at the state level. So, but it's you know, good questions, Mike. I wish we had better answers, but you know, it's where we are.
Um, If you don't mind, I'd like to take a stab at it. And so I'm going to insert myself here and apologize in advance because it's a long story. But it is one that I would like to at least test with you all to see. Because, you know, I agree with you. We have a lot of work to do. And the next budget session is going to be harder than this one because of the way that everything was in one-time funds this time. So I have a lot of questions that I submitted in writing. I understand that many of them, the answers to them are being developed for the finance meeting next week. I think there are a couple things maybe we could establish, and we will return to questions. But this question of, how this session shook out, I felt as if this session, our strategy was, I'm going to use the word confused in a way, um, that most of us who just work here kind of were not, because of our perception of what's been going on for the past few years, right? So I'm going to offer my take. I'm just one of many folks who work here, but I've been paying attention. There are lots of people who have also been paying attention. Um, and for the last 6 years, this system has been explicitly promising savings as a consequence of the consolidation process that will end exactly 2 weeks from today. And it's a consolidation process that we established in the very same year that the state's fiscal guardrails were defined, 2017. And that transformed a really well-meaning spending cap into a tool for austerity and reduction of state services. And you could even infer, though it's definitely less explicit, that for as long as the CSCU system has existed, it's 12 years, we have been at least implicitly agreeing to a path towards containment and shrinkage, since, as we discussed in our joint meeting at the end of last year, the state has not increased the block grant to our institutions for at least 15 years. It was 320 million in 2008. 14 years later, in 2022, it was 318 million, 2 million less. It was 316 million the year that CSCU was established, 2011. It has dipped down as low as 271 million since that time. So I think in that historical context, what we're seeing is that all additional funding provided to the system, whether it's fringe benefit support, special programs, pandemic support, it has all been at will one-time funding, no permanent commitments. And as a result, we've been unable to plan wisely and to grow or even maintain strategically. Instead, we fell into a pattern of warning of crisis every session and then extracting as much as we could from legislators for them to get us through another year or two. And then we often perform some minor penance to earn what we're offered, and we end up dying a slow death by 1,000 cuts in the process. So even the generosity of the past couple of years could be understood just enough to get us through the pandemic and over the hump of consolidation to deliver the savings that the consolidation was designed to produce. So the trajectory of our systems funding makes it so that this year we would have had to dramatically defy the constraints of the spending cap to get what the system asked for. It wasn't just give us more, it was change the structure of the state budget. And because once again, our additional funding is one time this budget, it will be that much harder again 2 years from now to get the funding we need to fit under the spending cap that's anchored by levels of the previous budget. In fact, I think it's pretty much impossible, right? So we don't just need more money next time around, we need a structural solution that makes sufficient, stable, recurring funding even possible. And that's a huge lift, and it's one that we can only do together. As far as the immediate political context, this session began with the governor, along with the House and Senate leadership, using an e-cert process to extend the bond lock for at least another 5 years. That was February 9th, before any legislative hearings that would allow the public and state agencies to weigh in on the needs of the state. They constrained the budget conversation and reaffirmed their commitment to the guardrails. That is, to the path of austerity and disinvestment, right, in state services that got us here in the first place. So that was before session even began in earnest. They tied the hands of legislators beyond the governor's current term. That was a clear statement about their willingness to engage in any shenanigans in the service of our preservation. And threatening $335 million of hundreds of layoffs, thousands of part-time eliminations, tuition hikes, reductions in offerings without any concrete justification in that context was not only a grandstand without sufficient power to back it, it was the equivalent of holding CSCU students and workers hostage to perform a shakedown of all state agencies and services for our benefit. other agencies and services that our students and families also need. So this ridiculous zero-sum game might be self-imposed, short-sighted, and brutal on the working families who benefit from our system, but it is the game the governor and the legislative leadership made abundantly clear was the one we were playing this session. And it's the one they've been preparing our system for years. Unfortunately, those who promised savings from merger one or merger two, or even the one way back in 92 when spending cap was originally introduced, clearly don't understand how higher education works. And the shape of our system is a political solution to a state budget problem, not an answer to the question we should measure ourselves against, which is, how are the children? Like, how are we taking care of the people in our state? The questions the FAC submitted to you in preparation for the meeting are focused on the most immediate threat, justifying layoffs, tuition increases, and other reductions because there is so much potential destruction in that path. And while I question the system's characterization of the crisis this session, I acknowledge that there's quite a cliff in 25 and harder yet years ahead. And we need to focus on working together to demonstrate that the state's vision for our system is not feasible. And we need to insist that lawmakers decide whether or not they intend to provide public higher education or just a semblance of it, model and for-profit institutions that do our system and state harm. This is a large public policy conversation we have never had because first we need to tell the truth, right? We can't advertise that we're building a college in the service of equity while we're building a structure to facilitate disinvestment in those who are already underserved. We can't pretend that we're solving existing problems for students when the problems that we've actually embarked on solving are not their problems. And we can't pretend that we are the state's darling when the state's actual commitments to us represent a death sentence. So as we reflect on the legislative budget session and look forward to future ones, it's necessary to be honest with ourselves and with others. Unless we change things significantly, it's likely to get harder, not easier from here. And we, under different leadership and with a different board composition, conceded to this long ago and reshaped ourselves to accommodate exactly this moment. What has gotten lost along the way is the public service that we're entrusted with preserving. Just because something's called a college or university does not mean it is one. And to paraphrase a metaphor from Senator Winfield this session, what good are guardrails when so many of us, so many of our students are already overboard and sinking fast? So the solution is bigger than just appeals for more funding, and it requires a fundamental statewide change that will also make it possible to fund all of the social supports that allow our system to function as a tool for social good and as an equalizing force. And while I know that it might not be this body's charge, right, to advocate for such things, I understand that. It's important, at least, that we are as clear as possible about its consequences for us and our lack of viability under the status quo. Because the change required is big. And again, we have to tell the truth. We can't brag about building an anti-racist institution when we're further disinvesting in students who have been disadvantaged by past disinvestment. No more celebration of programs that only aim to reproduce a precarious working classroom itself. We have to tell the truth. Name the need, stop scapegoating union workers because the benefit we provide to the state is those workers, and no more generational investments in just buildings, right? Because we have been wasting so much by contorting ourselves into shapes that simply don't work. Then we undo them again. We create new executive levels whose projects are just completely uninformed by the reality of the spaces that they govern. And there's the neglect, the complete neglect of the universities over the past few years. So we can't let those who are responsible for solving the problem to fail to recognize the deprivation and disenfranchisement that has been imposed upon those we're designed to serve. And had faculty and staff not been fighting against the rosy propaganda coming out of the system office for the past few years, I think we might not have lost this session's fight already years ago. That is my take on this. And I hope that it is helpful.
So thank you, Dr. Sanker. And look, I'll just say that we can't speak, meaning this current administration and this current board can't necessarily speak comprehensively or in totality to the actions of a previous administration or previous board. We are where we are. We're going to do the best that we can. Completely agree that our system and all of our institutions and the folks who are the blood and soul of this system deserve that investment. Our students deserve that investment. We clearly want to work together on that. And I know you and others have been paying attention to our, our process this session and our testimony in front of all the committees that called us before them. And we did our best to tell the system story and try to move us forward in a way that would have yielded a larger investment in the system. And we will continue to do that. And so I think as we pose the problems, as I always say, we're very happy to work with all of our stakeholders who will come together, and I think that's how we'll try to create those solutions, right? But they are going to be long-term solutions to try to address a situation that also took a long time to ultimately manifest in this moment. So we're in agreement on the large majority of what you put out there just now, and thanks for the thought and the care that you always put into your work on behalf of the FAC and fellow faculty.
Anyone else have any questions or comments? Jim?
Thank you for the comments. They're very perceptive. And I had a thought running around in my head, and you helped crystallize it. You said words to the effect of that the lack of honoring of public service motives that undergird public higher education. And I was reminded here that, and I'm trying to think about ways in which we can build perhaps unusual coalitions that go beyond not just all of us coming together to advocate and to be vocal about it, but other constituencies around the state. And one thing came to mind because it's something that many of you might not be as focused on as I am, because it's a down the street problem for me. This is the same discussion that one could apply to some parts of public transportation in the state. Exactly the same discussion. So if you happen to depend as we do on Metro North and specifically Shoreline East, a lot of people see the end of some of those rail services, particularly Shoreline East, in this budget. The services that have benefited from state investment, and yet the same thing is happening that we see. So I'm wondering if this, as you presented so clearly and logically, is this a way that we can build broader coalitions that go beyond, who are being affected by the same fundamental changes that you described? Can we broaden our coalitions? That's a tough thing to do. It's bad enough to ask us to be part of coalitions with each other, but to ask us to be part of coalitions with people who think, why would we get together with you? We're going through this. We're not the only ones in the state. So it's and I'm new to this, even though I've lived in Connecticut most of my life. I'm new to this attention to budgeting. And I agree. It's the challenge that you set out. And I don't have any quick solution, but it's the challenge. So I appreciate that.
Dr. Blitz, would you like to say something?
Let me unmute. I'm here in beautiful downtown Iowa City, attending the conference. And so I came here a day early in order to be able to get online for this rather than be in transport on the airplane. That said, the question which I have is, can we resolve the budget shortfalls endemic to our system, and in particular for FY25, with a new narrative and positive measures, rather than following the negative model of the Office of Policy and Management, which we saw reflected in the governor's initial budget? That says that enrollment decline must result in budget cuts. And it elicited the equally negative response we saw in the April 24th press release by CSCU. Budget cuts will result in forced layoffs of both full and part-time faculty and staff, increases in student tuition across the board, and elimination of programs, especially high overhead, employment-focused ones. And that's what caught the attention of the press. And if you ask people who are reasonably well informed about what's going on with respect to the CSU system and budget, amongst faculty and staff, certainly amongst those that I have spoken with lately, what they recall are these negative measures. It would be much better if they were able to have all of the facts and figures that Ben Barnes has made available, but people react to what they see in the press. So I think that this is not something which is a legacy from past administrations, although in part, I guess it is, but it's something that seems to be repeated. And it seems to me we have to move beyond that negative narrative. And so rather than being strictly negative about the April 24th press release, let me suggest some means that could be done which don't involve forced layoffs, tuition hikes, or program eliminations. One, use some of the system office, university, and community college reserves to offset part of the expected FY25's deficit, while respecting the reserves of those member institutions which have budgeted adequately in the past. Two, retirements and resignations of senior faculty and staff are usually replaced at lower salary levels for new hires or can be deferred for a year. Three, adopt pension-based measures, additional years, also known as golden handshake, to encourage voluntary retirements of faculty and staff. Four, limit to existing numbers system office personnel at all levels, since with the second system office in New Britain for the community college, the tendency may well be for each to expand into available space and increase their numbers. Five, extend 3+2 BA MA programs already at some universities and programs to all universities and eligible programs to attract additional students who might otherwise go out of state. 6, link employment-oriented certificates to completion of the associate's degree so as to retain students at the community college and better prepare them for possible career changes. 7, consider a 2+2 BA MA for community college graduates who transfer into the major for which they have been fully prepared at the 100-200 college level. 8, incorporate sustainability in all building and renovation plans for both environmental protection and green energy economies. 9, develop a shorter-term strategic plan, perhaps even replacing CSU 2030, with a handful of priority objectives and specific metrics to be achieved in order to restore confidence with the executive branch and legislative leaders. And 10, on the basis of the above sort of measures in FY24, request mid-biennium adjustments for FY25 as may still be needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Blitz. Does anyone else? Oh, yes.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much, Kalina. You did a nice job and some good thoughts I think that you had there. One of the things we need to keep in mind is we're not in a vacuum. We, as a university system, are out there looking for our needs. You have the elderly out there, K through 12 is out there, the handicap are out there. They're all looking for more dollars to help sustain the programs that they need. Then you look at the average citizen that's out there, and unless they have a son or a daughter, or they are themselves in a college or community college or university, the governor looks great with what he has done in his people, and rightfully so. The bond market loves us. We're paying down debt service. We have lower taxes. I mean, for the middle and lower income folks, I mean, that's a real big deal for these folks. And I think, you know, looking at what he has done and his administration has been very positive for the entire state of Connecticut. So what I think is we have to do a little more of, and I think you're kind of alluding to it, out of the box kind of thinking. and we have to do it together. We don't do it together, what's that saying, hang alone or, as a group, however you want to do it. But I think we're going to have to do it, and everybody, us, the board, you, colleges and universities, are going to have to give a little and work together to come up with something that is viable that we can move forward with as we go. I think Terrence's done a great job trying to keep this thing together, changing the philosophy that we've had over the past several years, making it a better place like this kind of a program. But it's not going to be easy. I'm sitting here because up with some kind of an agenda as we move forward. It's not something we're going to do in the next day or two because it's a big problem. It's not a small one. And, with Terrence at the top and everybody else working, and Joanne and folks and unions working together with the board, I think it can be done. It's not going to be easy, and it may not be done as easily as we like in the next year or so. It may take several years to do this, but you have to crawl before you walk, and I think that's where we are now. I think it's where we have to go.
And I just say, I think we also have to realize, though, that in that picture, when we talk about the whole state of Connecticut, certain people consistently drop out of that picture. And they are overwhelmingly our students, certainly at the community colleges, and the community college students end up at the universities. When we talk about Pell Grant recipients, we are talking about people who have been left behind in a number of ways by the state budget, not just higher ed, many other safety nets that make higher ed even possible for them. So yeah, I mean, I agree with you, but I think we need to talk a little bit more about what investment in higher ed actually represents for the state, because it is short-sighted to not invest in the people. And I think we've been looking about how we contribute to corporations, because we're always in the position of justifying our existence, right? So we're like, okay, here's how we contribute to you. But core primary responsibility is to the residents of the state of Connecticut and making their futures just a little bit more feasible. And that part, I think, has dropped out of that broader picture, right? So I hear you. There are a lot of people grabbing through different things, and I think it is that much broader picture about what our state budget restrictions do to state services across the board, right? As you pointed out.
I think Chair Stanker, I agree with many of the things you said, right? And there are systemic issues, and they have been here as long as I've been around. I was on the SAC 10 years ago, and we were talking about the same kind of funding challenges, right? And every year or every other year having to go and beg for more money and getting it in short-term lumps, right? And I think if we want a different approach to budgeting and different values from our legislative process, that's outside this room. We got to start working on hiring different people to represent us, right?
Mhm.
So what can we do, right? What can we do now? I sat on the Academic and Student Affairs Committee during all of COVID and after COVID, and the most amazing things happened. All of these new ideas started coming forward. Nobody was happy to shut down the campuses and to start having to teach online everything, and our students were deeply affected by that change. And some new ideas also came out of it. And they were driven by the faculty who had to operate in this system, right? And not just saying, let's all do COVID forever, right? But like, how can we take the best of what we learned and apply it to our programs, right? And some really innovative things happened. And it happened organically, kind of coming up from that process. And I think if we work together, knowing that the budget is kind of what it is right now, right? That we can start finding some organic ways to show off, how we can do great things. It's not going to stop the underlying issue that we're underfunding education. But we don't get a voice in that beyond our vote, right? We can tell the story differently, and I believe we will tell the story differently going forward. And I believe if we work together, we can do anything, right? Getting some of those guardrails lifted, listen, we're in a different place than we were 10 years ago, right? And we need to address that. And in the interim, I think we can't ignore the fact that that cliff is there and it's a year away. And we got to start working now to figure out how we keep those programs available for our students, how we provide the education we all want to provide to those students to the best of our abilities. And we can only do that together. Because our students can't afford the cost of the tuition hike it would take to keep everything exactly the way it is. We just can't do it. You're right. So thank you.
Thank you. I have a question that I had penciled in, and Professor Blitz brought it up. So let me ask for some elaboration on that, because Professor Blitz, you mentioned, I think these were your words, that we could be focusing on, it was number 10, requesting a mid-biennium budget adjustment. And that was one of the questions I had for the assembled group, who has much more experience in this than I do. Is that at all common? Is that possible? Does the state ever entertain? I didn't even know what the name of it would be, but Professor Blitz gave me that. It's mid-biennium budget adjustment. Does that make sense as one of our short-term, an element of a short-term strategic plan? Is that possible? I'll look to some of the folks around the table here who have much more experience in that. Does that happen?
So the short answer is yes, and we're certainly going to continue the conversation with our legislative leaders and the entire legislature and the governor's office. I mean, we can be nothing but honest and transparent about where we are, what we're doing, what we anticipate, the impacts, and so on and so forth. We will go through a rigorous process at every institution to try to deal with the budget where it is right now. But that doesn't stop us, and frankly, that's our job, to continue to advocate and argue for what we believe is in the best interests. And so that is we've already started talking about it. We've already started talking about what we want to try to focus on. And again, no plans. It's just we're literally not even 2 weeks away from the signing of the budget, but we're already kind of brainstorming as we do a postmortem on this session. What do we start thinking about for the next session? So
Just a couple quick thoughts. Look, I really appreciate the leadership, the faculty, staff, and the CSCU system leadership. I feel like we're in this together, and we're all, I think, saying essentially the same thing. We're fighting some really tough challenges. Anchor detailed some of them. The enrollment trends here and across the country, people's attitudes towards higher education and the cost of higher education is a big challenge for us here and all across the country. And so I just say this, I'm going to say it explicitly. I think the year 2 number for the CSCU system, not based on anything except the guardrails. And hopefully we can reopen the budget in the second year to have that discussion and get what's really needed to run a system that supports students and supports student success. I think in the meantime, we need each other. We need each other. We have to work together to open people's eyes about some of these larger issues that I just described. And I think we do need to show some due diligence to the governor and other people who think like him, that we're looking at our system, trying to provide the best service to our students, trying to do right by our staff and the people that deliver those services, and trying to use taxpayers' money responsibly. I think we can do that, but it's not going to be easy. And here's the one thing I'm certain, it's not going to work if we're not together on this. That's what I believe. We need each other in order to accomplish those really hard challenges over the next. Thanks.
I just wanted to briefly respond to Regent McCarthy's question about the biennium and adjustments there. It's my understanding we need to be in that conversation by October. in the General Assembly if we want to make a difference. The other thing I wanted to mention was that to sort of follow up on what VP Barnes mentioned in terms of OPM using the wrong numbers. I think that's a real issue that we need to be serious about. OPM told a story about our institutions, which was not accurate. I think we know that, and I think we need to point it out. It is not okay to misrepresent what our institutions are doing to the General Assembly because of some kind of agenda at work. It's not fair to our students, and it's not fair to our communities. So I think that's something we need to follow up on, especially in October, as we continue to work to shore up funding. And I just wanted to offer those thoughts. Further to Governor Lamont's performance, I hope everyone will keep a close eye on CT Mirror about the accuracy of his description of that performance. I think you'll see an interesting article there this week about that topic. So thank you.
I think we'll bring this portion to a close if anybody else has opportunity to say something about it. But we do appreciate these comments. Yeah, I didn't quite hear that. I'm not sure everybody heard that. That's quite all right. President Shea, do you have anything further to say?
Just quick, since somebody mentioned the papers, I really have been disappointed with Keith Fanoff and Pazinowski, who haven't gotten that straight about that story. You know what I mean? They're repeating the governor's story all the time about the CSUs. I thought that was a great point about that. We need to straighten that story out with the legislatures, but we might need to also straighten it out with the reporters. I don't know why they're really good budget guys, and I don't know why they're not getting that right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. So Chair Ryan, if I may, I'll bring this portion of the meeting to a close, and I'll just say, again, thank all the members of the FAC, thank all the members of our Board of Regents. Again, I think it's a really productive conversation. Look, this is not an easy place to be. We have to continue to work with all of our state partners. That includes the governor's office, that includes the legislature. And again, I think collectively we tell a great story. We have so much to be proud of. People, just, work indefatigably every single day to do what's great and right for our students and our state. And I just think that there's an opportunity to do that better, right? And so I am my own harshest critic, and whenever I feel like we could have done better, I will perseverate over that and try to find a way to improve. Let's control what we can control, and that's our story, right? The work is there, the outcomes of productivity is there, but if we can tell our story better, let's do that.
Insightful and certainly laid out the need for all of us to be working together to support our students. Before I call for a motion to move to executive session, let me state that the board will move to executive session for the purpose of discussing the appointment, employment, performance, evaluation, health, or dismissal of public officers or
Okay. Sorry, I thought we had closing statements. I believe, David, you already made your statement, yes?
Well, you
Okay.
can never say that I've already made my statement. There's always one more statement. And I
Never
do
get
have
two
something.
philosophy professors on mic, okay?
That was a big mistake when the chair and vice chair of the FAC were chosen some time ago. I do have something briefly, however, that I would like to say, so I'll
Okay.
just take 2 minutes if I may.
Sure.
It seems to me that there are basic principles which underlie the work of the board and its relation with the FAC. One is respect the distinct missions of the colleges and university and respect the autonomy and integrity of the constituent institutions. The CSU system is a system of 3 component systems: the community college and its 12 constituent units, Charter Oak and 4 Connecticut state universities. We should respect a system of systems or federated approach which combines respect for the autonomy and integrity of the constituent units with cooperation and leadership from the central administration. Policy should be based on consultation and consent of the constituent units, faculty, and staff. As an added measure for the transition to the one community college, continued college campuses and services at all existing locations should be guaranteed, and their individual accreditations maintained as a fallback measure, even if CSCC itself is accredited, presumably by NESHE in the next 2 weeks. 3, Two, respect shared governance. This implies a willingness to fully take into account the expertise of faculty and staff, and to focus on mutual agreement rather than imposed resolutions or solutions to make needed changes in the system. 3, respect faculty control of curriculum and pedagogy. While administration has control of matters such as budget and senior personnel, faculty must, by dint of their experience, expertise, control curriculum and pedagogy, subject to final approval and funding by administration. 4, practice better communication and consultation, and on that basis, we can envisage increased cooperation and, to the extent advisable, coordination. But the command and control practiced by the former administration, with perhaps an echo remaining at the system office, has to go entirely. The changes in the last 2 years to BOR and CSU leadership are significant and augurs well for improved functioning of the system and relations with the FAC. But old habits persist, and lack of mutual trust needs to be further addressed. This joint meeting of the BOR and FAC is hopefully a step in that direction, with much still remaining to be accomplished. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And I just want to reiterate again what a great opportunity this is. I hope next time, I mean, we had lots of different challenges this time. There will be more of us in the room. I also want to just acknowledge, David mentioned it just a little bit. We are 2 weeks away from the opening of a consolidated college, which is not an unrelated topic from the one that we were focused on today. And it is, I think, pretty unusual, the fact that we are launching the 5th largest community college in the country, and that when faculty meet with the board, it really doesn't get a lot of attention. So I will say this, FAC met with CT state leadership in May in hopes of getting some answers, an update, and responses to some concerns. And we were invited to submit the questions that we had in writing. We did deliver them, but the only response that we've received so far is that one of the vice presidents of that group has now filed a criminal investigation against one of our members. Nothing else. And it was filed the day after we delivered the questions, 5 weeks after the comments, the, what do you call them? The metaphor was used at our April meeting. So this is the state of our capacity, because we are established by statute to assist the board in governance, and this is a pretty big deal that's happening in a couple of weeks. That is a limitation to our capacity to do that adequately. I know that there was a NECHI update since then, and it came out on the 1st. We weren't notified. I'm not, I cannot speak to the veracity of the report, but I will say that we will follow up. There's been a lot in the past few weeks. We will do our best to at least give you some input as to where we think we stand. And yeah, good luck to us. But thank you again.
There'll be no discussion, votes by the board following the executive. Action following the executive. Allow me to call for a motion to move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Live stream.